Okay, today I'm going to talk you through 4 different types of lettering. You can see at the top I've put here 2019 because that's the year that we've done all these tutorials in. So the first one is just a simple backstitch. Now this is quite an obvious one. As I show you the 3 other ways, you'll be able to see both its benefits of being really easy and possibly also its flaws. Now, with any stitch you're using for lettering, the object of the game is to make your stitches as small as possible, because that way when you do end up going around curves, as I am here, and around the more complicated bits of the lettering, you're going to see that it looks smoother. If I was doing longer stitches and starting here, I would get a straight bit going right across, but if I split that up into 2 or possibly even 3, then I'm going to get a much smoother line. Okay, the next one I'm going to show you is whipped backstitch. So as with the backstitch, that starts with a base of backstitch, and then you're going to go back and make it look a bit smoother. Okay, so now I've stitched my backstitch base, I'm going to go back in and whip all of my stitches. So starting at the beginning and remembering that whipping means to go under the stitches the same way each time, and all this is going to do is give me a much smoother line than just the ordinary backstitch would give me. It will make your stitching look slightly more raised, and it will make it look more considered and smooth. So if you're going for a slightly more professional look to your lettering, then you may want to consider using whipped backstitch. You may have noticed that I'm not using a stand this time, and the reason for that is quite a few of these stitches involve going back, going in different directions with your needle through the stitches, and I don't like doing that on a stand because it means I'm contorting my hand rather than moving the hoop around. So with something like whipped backstitch, for example, I like to have the hoop free in my hand. So there you can clearly see the difference between whipping your backstitch and leaving it as it is. I personally prefer the whipped look, but the whipped look is only going to look as smooth as it does here if your back stitches are nice and small to begin with. So just remember that if you are planning to use that stitch. The next one I'm going to show you is using chain stitch for lettering. Now I'm going to use reverse chain stitch, but as I've said in the chain stitch tutorial a while ago, it is really entirely up to you which version of chain stitch you want to use. Personally, I recommend using reverse chain without a stand and normal chain with a stand, because reverse chain involves going underneath your stitches, and as I said with the whipped stitch, when you're doing anything like that and you're going to need to be going under at different angles, it's much easier to do without a stand. Again, keeping my stitches nice and small because of the tight corners. Any stitch you do for lettering, you should be keeping your stitches nice and small. When you come to overlaps, don't worry about them, just keep stitching over your previous stitches. If you like, you can stop and start again on the other side of what you've already stitched. Depending on which bit you wish you want to end up on top, I like to stitch the letters as I would write them. So I started at the top of the 2 and went down and round. I started here with the O and then went round, because I feel that that makes most sense for me, but it's entirely down to preference. And of course you may not be using a font where that's a relevant factor at all anyway. Chain stitch is going to give you quite a definite and thick, chunky look to your lettering. It obviously depends how thick the thread you're using is, but it will obviously appear thicker than other stitches you're going to do, because you essentially end up with a double thickness everywhere along your line. So you can see that gives me a more textured look to my lettering. So you've got a very simple look, a smooth look and a textured look. The last one that I'm going to show you is split stitch. Again, with this one, make sure that your stitches are small and you're going to want to take it slowly around the corners. So you're really making sure that you place the previous stitch properly with your needle as you go back through it. I would only recommend using split backstitch, not split going forward for lettering, because that way you can really make sure the previous stitch is placed correctly. If you're going forward, sometimes it's harder to do that. So there you have it, 4 ways that I would recommend doing lettering: backstitch, whipped backstitch, chain stitch and split backstitch.